Good morning, everyone. I'm Luigi Ferrar, the Chair and CEO of the Brookfield Sustainability Institute. And it's a wonderful pleasure to see you again. I wasn't able to see you last week because I was away in Vancouver, but it's nice to see you all again for our third part of our ESG Immersive Learning Series. And we're looking forward to an exciting morning. During each session, you've been hearing from industry experts making new connections and furthering your knowledge, integrating ESG principles into your business. You've learned how to design systems thinking for sustainability in your organization. Then you learned last week's approaches and methodologies to build and implement interdisciplinary engagement strategies throughout your organization using our Charette methodology as a prime model. You'll learn how to measure and ensure sustainable impact in your organization today, which is the focus of what we're looking at this morning. We'll start with a fireside chat with experts from Enbridge Gas, and then we'll hear from Pablo Corell, who's our guest facilitator and a BSI associate from Madrid in Spain. He will then take you through a workshop, having you think about what and how to measure key performance indicators for sustainable impact across your organization. Each table will then have a chance to stand up and share the results of your work with the rest of the room. And finally, Pablo will come back up on stage and reveal some development measures for sustainable impact within organizations, showcasing some proprietary dashboards that he's developed as measurement tools. And then we'll wrap up for the day, allowing time for you to further connect and network with other people here. This program series has been brought to you along with the Toronto Region Board of Trade as our program development partners. We want to thank our series partners, CBRE, RBC, and Enbridge Gas, and our networking partner, WSP. We'd also like to acknowledge the Board of Trade's principal sponsors, the University of Toronto, Scotiabank, the Globe and Mail, and SNC-Lavalin. Environmental, social, and governance issues impact organizations at all levels. This requires us to mobilize in new and creative ways to help remove organizational silos, test individual assumptions, and ultimately enable the conditions for sustainable systems transformation. The challenge comes when organizations seek to develop and implement their own ESG strategies. How do they ensure that they're applying the right frameworks to future business decisions and gain buy-in that they need for long-standing success? All of us gathered today can acknowledge that in order for business to stay relevant and competitive and ultimately grow, it's crucial for them to have an ESG that is strategically prioritized and with a plan for clear implementation. Those who don't are at risk of falling behind. At the BSI, and I'd like to take a second to just talk about the BSI, we're looking at systemic thinking and how it requires a new type of problem solving that's holistic and that is integrated within the overall organization. We need to look at inequity, social injustice, and we need to deal with climate change as a society. These are the major issues that are impacting us today. That's what's driven you to come here. And our express function over the next 15 years at the BSI is to take the climate challenges that are confronting us and not to just analyze them any further or to try to understand their impact they're having, but instead to work on proposing solutions that will transform the marketplace and transform the impacts that are happening into positive impacts as opposed to negative impacts. So we have our three pillars that we have at the BSI, our Global Solutions Studio that works with companies, with organizations, with government, with nonprofits and foundations to develop the solutions that are needed. And what we're doing is we're bringing experts from around the world, we're bringing great graduate talent from around the world, and we're working with companies to solve the problems that are out there. We've, so far, in the short year that we've been in operation, we've worked with 21 companies. We've brought 170 students to work together on charrettes to solve different problems. And we've hired 50 students to work side by side with companies in the energy sector, in the food security sector, in transportation, to develop climate positive neighborhoods and to develop what will be the first circular fashion brand for tomorrow, which we're launching with a company called Consciously. So we're working to provide the solutions that will take us forward, that will bring us to net zero by 2050, because that's what the world needs more of now, not just analyzing the problem. We need to be focused on solving the problem. So this morning, we're working and have the pleasure of having the sponsor in Enbridge Gas. And Enbridge Gas is a company that has a long history of working on climate problems and energy. In fact, we had the pleasure at George Brown College of working with them with their Savings by Design programs of doing a charrette that led to the design brief for the new tall wood building that if you just walk out the door and walk down the street, you'll see the first of its kind tall wood institutional building with a new structural system and a new mechanical and electrical system being built right now to a standard that is beyond the National Building Code and the Ontario Building Code, which will help transform the national and building codes of Canada and Ontario. So Enbridge is a company that's long understood these things, and we have the pleasure today to have three people from Enbridge with us. Malini Giridhar, who's the VP of Business Development and Regulatory at Enbridge Gas, Ainsley Murdoch, who's the specialist in carbon strategy at Enbridge Gas, and Gal Lee, who's the analyst in carbon strategy with Enbridge Gas. So I'd like to invite them to come up to the stage. Malini will start with giving us an overview, and then we'll move into a sort of conversation-style question and answer period. Please come ahead. Come on, Nicole.
Thank you, Luigi, for that very warm welcome and introduction. So as Luigi said, I'm Malini Giridhar, VP of Business Development and Regulatory at Enbridge Gas, and good morning to all of you. On behalf of Enbridge, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak to you today and share how we have developed our environmental, social, and governance practices, or ESG practices, and how they're embedded in our business. While ESG is getting a lot of airtime today, it's not something we at Enbridge are just talking about. It's been part of our DNA for a long time. And ESG is actually foundational for our business. And our ESG framework has proven to be a useful tool to track, manage, and convey to investors and other stakeholders our progress against key elements of potential business risk and opportunity. We have established specific plans within and across Enbridge's businesses with clear pathways to achieve them. And importantly, we've also aligned our executive compensation and our financing costs to ESG performance strategies. So we've actually issued more than $7 billion worth of sustainability bonds that will be tied to our ESG performance in the coming years. So you may ask, why is ESG important to Enbridge? And as one of the largest energy infrastructure companies in North America, we want to keep positioning ourselves to be the energy supplier of choice for our customers. And while the world has an urgent imperative to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and transition to a lower carbon economy, we also know that energy is what fuels quality of life for us. So from that perspective, we have a two-pronged growth strategy, both in conventional fuels, where the focus is how do we reduce the emissions associated with bringing these fuels to market, and then, of course, lower carbon fuels, which is really around renewable electricity, and now increasingly lower carbon fuels as well. So From the E perspective, the environmental perspective, we have a twofold objective to make sure that our investments going forward can be associated with lowering emissions, and then to also make sure operationally that we do a great job of reducing our own emissions. So from the perspective of investing in lower carbon energy and conventional fuels that lower emissions, our focus is on gas. We know that gas has the ability to reduce emissions relative to diesel, relative to coal. So whether it's gas-fired generation or bringing LNG to markets that are very dependent on coal and diesel, these are ways to reduce emissions. When it comes to renewables, we've been in the renewables business for over 20 years now. We are one of the largest Canadian renewable generation companies, initially focused on onshore renewables and now increasingly offshore renewables in Europe. In fact, we just recently placed into service a 480 megawatt Saint-Nazaire project, France's first commercial offshore wind facility. And we also acquired Tri-Global Energy, which is focused on onshore renewables and a pipeline of over $7 billion worth of solar and wind projects that will allow us to expand our onshore development expertise. And in terms of our own emissions, our operational emissions, or what people call Scope 1 emissions, we've set a target to achieve a 35% reduction in carbon intensity. So basically, the emissions associated per unit of energy that we deliver by 2030. And I'm pleased to tell you we are well on our way to achieving those targets. We have reduced our intensity by 27% since 2018. So we actually are hopeful that we will more than exceed the 35% reduction that we were aiming for by 2030. But that's not all. We also have a net zero by 2050 target, which is an absolute target. So as you can imagine, it's an interesting challenge for an energy delivery company to look at the complexity of delivering more energy, reducing emissions at the same time, and making sure that the energy we deliver in the future is associated with lower emissions for the people that use that energy. Our sustainability performance is being recognized. Many ratings agencies have identified Enbridge as a leader among energy peers, including the Dow Jones Sustainability Indices, the Carbon Disclosure Project, and Moody's. So now on to the S. So although the E part of ESG tends to get the most attention, our commitments on the social side of things are just as important. And when we think about the social side, we think about it along three pillars. The first is, of course, the diversity of our workforce, and I'll talk about that. We also think about the communities we operate in and economic inclusion for the communities that we work with. And the third is just moving further along from an inclusion and equity perspective in terms of how we view social issues. So when we think about our workforce, we are very focused on building a more diverse workforce that better represents the communities we operate in. We have ramped up our efforts to make improvements in our workforce for women, racial and ethnic people, individuals with disabilities, veterans, and Indigenous people. So we have representation targets in each of these categories. So for example, for women, we want women to be 40% of our workforce. We want 28% of our workforce to represent racial diversity. And we also have targets around veterans as well as Indigenous participation. Alongside this, we also have an equity and inclusion action plan that includes specific milestones for recruitment, development, succession, unconscious bias, and anti-racism training. So, we're very pleased with the fact that our employees are encouraged to undergo Indigenous training, anti-racism training, and then we've also got a specific focus on recruitment by having dedicated recruiters that focus on Indigenous communities, for example, in Indigenous hiring, asking ourselves if we can sort of reserve certain activity as, focused on Indigenous communities and so on. So we also published our first Indigenous Reconciliation Action Plan, And as part of the commitments within our IRAP, which is the acronym for it, we continue to focus on creating financial partnerships with Indigenous communities. So that's another aspect of how we're looking at the S side. So for example, our landmark Athabasca Oil Sands Pipeline Equity Partnership with 23 communities in the oil sands of Northern Alberta is now considered the gold standard for creating true partnerships with Indigenous peoples. So in this case, we had 23 Indigenous communities acquire 11% interest in our Athabasca oil sands pipeline system. It was a deal worth $1.1 billion, and it'll provide steady, long-term cash flow, which will benefit these communities. And these win-win partnerships are part of the future of energy. And as we look at investments in new energy projects, we'd like to make equity partnership from Indigenous communities sort of a basic premise of moving forward. Obviously, it's not easy, and we have a lot of work to do, and it's not easy to replicate what you were able to achieve with one group of Indigenous communities. But the important thing is that it is an area of focus for us as we look at new energy investments. And another initiative we are proud of is the Prism Energy and Gender Cool Partnership. So Gender Cool is a youth-led movement aimed at replacing misinformation with positive experiences meeting transgender and non-binary youth. And Enbridge employees and their families have access to virtual hangouts to build community. We're also dedicated to advancing our Black Equity Plan by continuing to partner with the Black North Initiative, and we've achieved more than 50% of our goal of 6% representation of Black employees by 2025. Also, our legal and supply chain teams are supporting diversity and inclusion through mentorship, internships, and supplier programs that are leading to greater opportunity and equity and inclusion. And finally, on the G front, or the governance front, we are committed to leadership in corporate governance through award-winning governance practices and a culture of responsibility and accountability. And this begins with ensuring that we have an independent board of directors with a range of diverse perspectives, experience, and expertise. And when we look at that diversity, it's not just diversity of thought, diversity of experience, it's diversity across generational lines, making sure that you have younger and older board members, racial diversity, et cetera. Our board of directors is elected by Enbridge's shareholders. It's responsible for overseeing the business and affairs of our company. And our goal is to achieve 40% representation by women and 20% underrepresented ethnic and racial groups by 2025. And on January 1st, 2023, Pamela L. Carter was appointed as Enbridge's first female board chair, and she is our first Black chair. Everybody who works for Enbridge is accountable for upholding high standards of conduct and understands that transparency around our performance is essential for building trust. So our statement of business conduct is a foundation for our commitment to ethics and compliance, and all of our employees are required to complete it annually. The other part of this governance is, of course, robust reporting. And we've published an annual sustainability report for 20 years, issued the first and only focused report on Indigenous relationships, and released a standalone report on climate in 2019, which was aligned to the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD. One of the things we find in this ESG space is the acronyms are mouthfuls, so I'm trying to use the full words. So in closing, I just wanted to conclude with, setting ESG goals is important. It's what our stakeholders expect from us. But how we execute our strategy, how it is fully embedded in the way we operate, oversee the business, engage with communities, and develop and energize our workforce is really key to the sustainment of ESG practices. Thank you for your time.
So, Malini, that's a strong record that Enbridge has shown. So what would you say has been Enbridge's secret sauce for staying focused on ensuring that you have an effective ESG strategy? What's been the key tool that you've used to staying focused?
I think the key tool for Enbridge is really making sure that the importance of ESG is understood across its entire leadership chain and down to its employees. So it really begins with our board and the sustainability committee at the board. The way our senior executive management team has been very deeply involved in coming up with our ESG goals. And then also from an internal communications perspective, helping all of our employees understand why we must be achieving these goals. So I think it's a cultural thing, and showing deep commitment from leadership has been key.
Okay. So that deep commitment across the organization, communication within the organization, and developing a kind of culture
That's right.
of ESG responsibility amongst everyone in the organization. So, there's lots of talk about, the sustainable environmental parts of ESG. And people, might question, you're, a company, an oil and gas company in essence, they'll question, how do you do this when you have to still conduct a business that is potentially counter to some of the objectives that you're involved with? So how do you manage that tension, that conflict?
That's a great question. So, the mission of an energy delivery company is always access to energy, safety, reliability, and resilience. And increasingly, sustainability is part of that, right? We can't be all of the above without also showing a path to sustainability. So early, I'd say more than a decade ago, we sort of set up our strategic intents, and delivering the energy our customers need and want became a very basic, or probably one of the top strategic priorities that we had. But we also developed other balancing pieces. So for example, trust with our stakeholders, building a trusting relationship with our stakeholders, which means that you have to be consistent with them. Ensuring that investors want to invest with us, right? Making sure that you're always first choice of investors. That was the third plank. And the fourth plank is, of course, employees that have pride in working for our organization. So I think by setting these strategic intents and making it very clear that we're in the business of delivering the energy our customers want, but we will work with our stakeholders in a way that they trust us, that we will deliver our promises to our investors, and ensure that our employees have pride in working for the company. I think those are four strategic intents that have really helped.
So that clear focus of intent has
Yes.
remained a guide for you over the years, and enabled you to do the innovation that you need while still conducting your current business, in essence.
Absolutely. And I'll give you a quick example. So we were the first utility in North America to do hydrogen blending. So since then, we started down that path in 2014, and by 2018 we put up this first utility scale green hydrogen production facility in Markham, and then 2022 we started blending. Now, having done that pilot, and having a group of employees focused on what was really huge innovation in our sector, like nobody was talking about hydrogen at the utility level, but having a core group of employees sheltering the investment, making sure that we address the barriers to getting that done, has been phenomenal for our company. Because now, when, for example, the US government announced the Inflation Reduction Act and said there's significant dollars towards hydrogen, we have the ability to say, hey, we've done this, right? And we can leverage that expertise. Another example is carbon capture. So we announced a very large project in Alberta that will capture carbon from a cement company as well as a power generating company, but also offer other companies the opportunity to capture the emissions and transport and sequester them. Well, that was done with Indigenous participation as well. And they were able to leverage the earlier work that I mentioned, in trying to figure out an equity relationship on our oil pipelines. So really that innovation comes from acknowledging great ideas and then removing barriers so those ideas can be executed. And making it very clear that executive leaders are committed to doing that.
And obviously, the completion of them puts you
Yes.
in a position in anticipation of changes that are coming.
Exactly.
So they're kind of strategic projects that,
Yes.
having undertaken them, makes you more ready to confront the next wave
Yeah.
of competition in the energy sector.
Right, right. Yeah, and if I can just add to that, we've accepted that we have to get to net zero early, right? We did not spend a lot of time fighting the concept of net zero and the fact that we ultimately have to reduce emissions. And so accepting that has allowed us to then say, all right, this is today's energy business. How should that energy business evolve in the future so it can actually meet those goals? And our CEO, I'll say our current CEO, Greg Ebel, but before him, Al Monaco, and before him, Pat Daniel, for 20 years almost, we've had CEOs that have recognized this.
And it's brought out the creative side of the company to problem solve, in essence.
That's right. That's right.
So now I'd like to extend the questions to Ansley and Egea. So how, you're both carbon strategists, how do you use targets and metrics to measure your emissions performance? How are you integrating that work into the company?
So I guess for the metrics piece, we've implemented metrics for our different emission reduction opportunities into various department scorecards and dashboards. And by implementing those metrics, it's given visibility to our GDS, like our emission strategy, and to those emission reduction opportunities. And by giving visibility, it's helped just move those opportunities forward. And I would say also promoted employee engagement, just I guess what Melanie was saying, right? It's all the way down. So by putting those metrics front and center, employees have, I guess, picked up the ball and ran with it. But yeah, just by putting them forward, yeah.
So you're able to share the problem with the organization. Is it through dashboards that you did it, or?
Yeah, so different groups have set up dashboards for tracking, but then there's also
Our business
metrics
scorecard.
Within the business unit scorecard.
Yeah. So as an example, I'll tell you something about what we did this year. So we try and identify things that, a large number of employees can identify with taking action. So this is a little technical, but we have, obviously we have natural gas carrying assets. When we do maintenance and so on, you may have to clear the gas, in that facility in order to do maintenance. We have something called blowdown compressors at some of our sites that have the ability to then capture that methane so it doesn't escape and can get fed back once the maintenance is done. So putting a metric that says, we want to increase the amount of methane we capture by, say, 33% or some bigger number than we have historically, puts a real focus on employees. It forces them to plan that maintenance activity. It forces them to say, okay, I don't want an unplanned maintenance situation, so I'm going to make sure that I plan this. Because you can't capture emissions if you're doing an emergency maintenance, right? So it really forces much better planning in terms of your activity. And we put that in as a metric at the start of this year. It was communicated. And already by May, we are seeing a much higher incidence of capture of methane. And so when you think about all the different activities where emissions occur, if you can have a plan that obviously targets the biggest pieces first, but has a plan to then go down and capture more of them, then that's really drives results.
Yeah, I've noticed that in our own organization. Once you measure something and you put a real target, people work towards the target. It's just a natural human response to try to meet the targets that they've been set. And maybe this is for Egea, how do you quantify the GHG emissions? Like, what process do you use and what methodologies do you use to quantify?
Thank you for the question. I've been hoping to get a question like this with my engineering background. So on a high level, we quantify emissions by using activity data, emission factors, and where applicable, control factors to each source in the inventory. So activity data reflects Enbridge's operations and assets. It can come in different forms, such as the turbine and engine fuel usage, the pneumatic device and the fugitive component counts, etc. And the data we collect come from a variety of systems. To name a few, the Encompass, SAP CAS, TileDig, different database. And then we will try to find the appropriate emission factor, which is a representative value that attempts to relate a pollutant released with the activity that released the pollutant. For example, the CO emission factor from engines is published in the unit of pound per million cubic feet of fuel combusted. And it can be from a variety of sources as well, published emission factors, engineering estimates, and of course, direct measurement. Where possible, direct measurement and site-specific emission factors are used. In other cases, default factors such as the CEP manual will be used. And after quantifying the emissions, we also perform QA/QC by looking at a yearly comparison and abnormal trends. So that's how we quantify the GHG emissions in a nutshell.
Yeah. So, it's clear that like it's hard work. Like you have to find the standards, you have to find ways of quantifying it and then tracking it and then understanding how you can change it. So I think sometimes people underestimate how achieving sustainability or social inclusion, it's truly hard work. And so with that knowledge that it's hard work, what are the challenges that are really confronting your carbon strategy? And how are you able to overcome them? Because it can be overwhelming to see this, the extent of the problem, and then the solutions aren't necessarily always so easy to develop. So how have you been confronting those really difficult strategic problems?
Ashley, do you want to give a go?
Yeah, so I guess like as Egea mentioned, we do rely on emission factors to calculate our emissions for our GHG inventory. And so one of the challenges would be that by using emission factors, we don't necessarily reflect precise actual emissions in our inventory for some of our sources. So they're based on industry data. That's what emission factor is. So although that's like an accepted estimation methodology, it doesn't reflect necessarily the actual emissions for all our sources. So I guess the challenge is that for some of the emission reduction opportunities we're implementing, we wouldn't necessarily see those reductions in our inventory because of the way we calculate our emissions. So we're working to implement a more comprehensive measurement-based program in order to improve the accuracy of our emissions inventory, which, like you said, will be more work. And that leads to like another challenge is just data management. It becomes almost an overload of data, right? You've got measurement information, you've got equipment counts, and we have millions of emission sources and many different emission opportunities that are coming forward. So just tracking all of that information is a challenge. So although Enbridge has had data management system in place to help with emissions inventories, for many years. We're continually working to improve that database management system. So, working to integrate it with other software programs so that it's not so many manual inputs, and reduces some of the human error, and it will also keep the inventory more current, because emissions reporting is no longer just like an annual thing. It's becoming like quarterly and monthly, right? It's just annual is kind of gone. So that's kind of how we're approaching some of the challenges. And then even for emissions, we're now implementing emissions forecasts. So we'll be looking to implement emissions forecasting software, so that can help us also track the emissions opportunities instead of us having to reach out to every group. The individual contributors driving those opportunities can then input information related to those opportunities into the database, as opposed to us trying to keep our hand on everything.
It's interesting. When you delve into the complexity of how you have to execute on these targets and how do you make it all work, it really is. It's such a major information technology and communications effort. So, how are you thinking about, say, IT differently, and thinking about communications differently? You mentioned this transfer from yearly checks to quarterly, and now to monthly. In my industry, there's the idea of real-time analysis and real-time data. Especially we teach that in our IT school. So how is your company changing, to become more of a information-oriented company, and a company that has the right biofeedback, in essence, in place, so that as people are working, they're able to adjust because they have the right information when they need it at the right time. So how are you guys managing that? Because I'm sure everyone in the audience is thinking, how do I set a system like that up in my organization? Right?
Yeah. And if you want to take this, I know we're, so at Enbridge, of course, we're a large company with, 4 different businesses. We've got an oil transportation business, a gas transmission business, and utility, and then our power business. So our IT systems are kind of centrally managed. And so we have a central group that's currently focused on implementing the software. I think that's been RFP'd, and so hopefully that'll get implemented over the next year or two. But to your point, even structuring this in a way that works for each business unit is a struggle, because the sources of emissions vary so much between the different businesses. So anyway, this work is underway and it'll be implemented. But I did want to highlight another area that we focus on. So there's not just the measurement, the frequency of measurement across all of the emission sources. There's also the emissions forecasting. Based on the growth of our activity, what do emissions look like in the future if we continue with the same trajectory? And then there's our asset management plan. So as we look to replace assets, as we look to modernize our different assets, how are we factoring in the data that we have gathered and understood in terms of how we look at future designs, of our stations, for example, of our metering equipment, our regulators. So definitely very complex. I think our engineering team is very focused on this right now. But it's overwhelming, as you said, unless you can look at it in discrete chunks. And ultimately, you still have to apply sort of a capital investment or a capital allocation framework to say, where do you focus on the most? Is it IT solutions for measurement and reporting, replacing industry emissions factors? How much goes into that? How much goes into actually replacing some of your systems? How much goes into the way you operationally conduct an activity, the focus on capturing emissions, for example, when you're doing maintenance work? So many angles to it. So this is just a little flavor, I think.
Yeah, so it's truly a systemic
Yeah,
effort because
exactly.
there's efforts, as you say, to predict and forecast and innovate to meet those forecasts, but at the same time, there's all the replacement work and ongoing maintenance. So it's so multi-pronged, the need for measurement and for having the framework that coordinates that measurement so that it integrates it all together, right? So I think this is a perfect moment to thank you for sharing with us today. I think everyone in the audience is facing these issues, and today's really about how the rubber hits the road. And so I want to thank you all for sharing with us before we head now into our speaker, Pablo Corell, Egea, who has specialized in this exact type of work and who will start to share more with us. So thanks so much to you all.
Thank you.
Now I'd like to introduce Pablo. Our theme for today's session is ways to measure and ensure sustainable impact. There's probably no one better to talk about this than Pablo. Pablo holds a dual industrial engineering degree from the Polytechnic University of Catalonia and the Politecnico of Milan. And he's an MBA from the Ramon Llull University and a master's in business sustainability management from Cambridge University. I first met Pablo as a young man in Milan who was working for an NGO on sustainability. Since then, in 2019, he started his own management consultancy company, which was, after 2 years, acquired and integrated into Deloitte. He's currently leading the climate and sustainability practices for Deloitte's financial advisory unit in Spain and collaborates worldwide as an M&A ESG expert. He specialized in corporate sustainability strategies and impact accounting structure, and he's focused on delivering effective and measurable financial, economic, environmental, and social impact through cutting-edge corporate sustainability models. During his professional career, he's worked with clients such as IBM, Go, Bayer, Siemens, but he's also worked with industry sectors that have needed to revolutionize themselves, like the apparel manufacturing industry as well. So he's, being located in Europe, he's also bringing to us that European perspective. They're a bit ahead on their legislation, but we can be sure that the legislation that's in Europe now is coming soon to Canada, and we estimate it's probably 2 or 3 years away from being implemented in Canada. And he'll be able to give us a preview today of some of the things that we will be facing in our own jurisdictional context over the next few years. So without further ado, Pablo.
Hello, everyone. We clearly went over the line with the presentation. It's not as it sounds. It's more normal. Yes, I'm going to talk about impact measuring, and I think, first of all, I would like to thank the BSI and, of course, Luigi for bringing me here. For me, it's an amazing experience. First time doing a speech here in Canada, and I think you're going to love as Luigi says, I think you're going to love how do we approach from a regular, can you hear me? Yeah, I think I was hearing me myself very loud. So how are we going to approach from a regulatory perspective and how corporate structures may evolve and corporate accounting or accounting structure may evolve so we can include some non-financial data within our P&L. I also like to thank, of course, the Toronto Board of Trade for hosting the event, and I think this is an amazing venue, and I love it, so thank you very much. And of course, thank you to Enbridge for sponsoring the talk. I think we will have 3 cases, and we'll talk about energy sector, we got to talk about real estate, and we talk about specific consumer goods industry that you all have a specific paper on the table. for the business case. As I said, these are the contexts for you to focus on what we're going to talk about. My objective is that you find out of this speech, that you find a way that you can come around numbers and bring a specific value or for non-financial data within your company. Of course, I will try to differ from sector and industry, so you can all feed yourself within the conversation. And the idea is to see how metrics that were not mainly relevant for specific companies can become really strategic when you're planning a worldwide strategy for your company. I think Luigi talked about the background. Probably the difference that I would say came across my experience is that I focused very early on data modeling. I started as an engineer and then moved to the corporate side, understanding how corporations were structured. So I think that the added value of my work is mostly explaining that emissions and data, and of course, and non-financial data cannot be thought in an organization perspective. It has to be thought about across services, across products. So you have to bring down accounting to the product, the actual service that the company is doing. So it's a very difficult exercise, but of course, it requires a very numeric experience and how to assign specific values to specific activities or actions that the company is having. But it turns out to deliver a much brighter model. So you can assign, for example, a specific metrics for marketing strategist or for the marketing department or for the purchase department. So the CO2 emissions of a whole company could be distributed from departments or specific actions or specific responsible persons. So you'll see that in the next slides. Of course, this is how it's going to go. I hopefully stick to time. And we'll do a short workshop for you to just think about metrics and think about what kind of indicators you can bring up from your companies and from the different departments. I want to start defining a few concepts, which would be sustainability, of course, impact, and of course, externalities. I'm always referring to a system or organization's ability because I consider ourselves a system. A company is a system as well, an organization. So you'll be referring to corporates or to environments as a systems or organizations. When I refer to impact, I'm going to refer to any influence, anything that can affect the state of other system or organization. And of course, when externalities, we're going to refer to those impacts that we are not measuring or that we're not taking into consideration within our operation. Of course, I want to just give an example. When I talk about impacts, it's because we're actually having a real impact in the world. We are now in the Anthropocene. Our impact is, human impact is now defined as the leading change in geopolitical, in geological sphere. So it's not official, but of course, we are now having so much impact on geological change that this era that we're living is called the Anthropocene. We can see clearly that we're changing the structure of the system that we're living in. We are overpopulating the countries, of course, on the earth. I think every day we are adding 200,000 people per day to our system. So that means that population growth, we're living in a finite world. So if population keeps growing, resources will be limited. Our consumption levels are massive. We already have produced more material, or man-made material, that weighs more than all livestock in the earth. So our consumption levels are clearly absurd, and we have to understand how to handle this and how we're going to structure this, or how do we create systems that recycle, reuse, and rethink where all our waste is going. Of course, this trend that we're having has impacts on climate and then temperatures, of course, and how our ecosystem will affect us. So that will come with sea level rises. We'll have higher temperatures in the next years. Of course, we have much more aggressive weather extreme events. So normally we had floods, of course, but we didn't have so many and so rough that we're seeing now. And it's happening all over the world. Of course, heat waves come from one side, cold waves come from another, but the complete system is becoming more aggressive every time. We, of course, generating the need of migrations, and our population cannot hold anymore in specific areas because of the need that we are generating ourselves and because of this, how the system is reacting against us. We are over-concentrating matter and our systems. We are over-exceeding our urbanization projects, and our growth is massive, as you can see. And of course, Toronto, I think, after a few days walking around here, I was very, very surprised about how much you grow, guys. It's amazing. And of course, systems have limits, and exaggerated growth not always has a good impact. So it not always turns out to be good. And that could be transformed to a geopolitical level. So what this rush that we are running into is taking us to. I think this is the most complicated graph that you will see today. So hopefully you can understand it. It's very simple, but it has some things that might be disturbing. So we understand the system as the circle, the green circle. This is a limited system that we're working on. In the early days, we were working on that system where economy was defined, and we used matter and energy. We transformed matter and energy in a way that we close the circle to generate economic value. So our system offered specific economic services, ecosystemic services, economic services for ourselves, so we can generate a trade and all the welfare that comes from economic activity. And if we ended up with a specific amount of welfare. On the other side, if we come to, well, of course, the system has two inputs, and one input and one output. The input is solar energy that comes to the system, and of course, we have matter and energy that is not destroyed. That was the earlier model when society was, when economy was defined. Now we are living in this model. Population, the Earth is full, so the blue box is how full is the Earth? How is the economic service full the whole system? So since the population has grown dramatically and our system is going to be full, our economic services are no longer sustainable because, of course, the ecosystemic services cannot match the levels that we're running. So you can see, for example, in that stage, the perfect balance would be that the ecosystemic and the economic service would be the same size. So we can stay in the balance. So when we fish generate themselves faster than we fish again. But in this system, it doesn't happen. So fish do not generate faster. So we have to create models to generate more fish, and et cetera, et cetera. But the problem in this system is not actually the resources, because innovation might take us to be able to generate more fish or more fruit. So that might bring us to that. But the problem is how we disorder things. There's a concept of entropy, that how a system is, let's say, the state of disorder of a system, and there's two definitions. One is the state of disorder, and the other one is in thermodynamics, is the amount of work that a system can do. When you have a specific system, for example, you have trees growing next to trees, that system grows faster because it's the same material, same environment, and the growth is bigger. If you have one tree on one side of the world and the other tree on the other side, they don't grow at the same pace. And that's happening with materials. So what we are doing in the end, in this process economy, we're taking clean, organized materials that can come from a quarry, that could come from a forest, whatever, and we are transforming in very disordered materials that could be, for example, your phone. So 7,000 materials, whatever, that you can fit in a specific phone, and it's actually not organized because we will dump that in a bin or in a litter or whatever, or we maybe recycle, but the material would be disordered. So the problem is not only that we run out, the problem is that all the material that we generate is disordered, and it mostly includes polymaterial things. So that disorder is what causes that the system is not going to hold up as well for that. This affects actually to three main stakeholders. So this situation affects the three main stakeholders. It could be presented as public sector, private sector, and society. We must understand that, of course, society has a very big impact, but I think that you all know that you live every day, that we are mostly carried away for specific corporations, overconsumption plans. We are kind of following the path as economy grows. So I think we're not actually the game changer here yet, because we cannot react as fast. Of course, you could be your own system leader in terms of ESG and change, but of course the impact that you're going to have is little. If everyone takes it, of course it's going to be massive, but I think that the driver is not going to come from society at first. Later we will be the drivers afterwards. Public sector, of course, is adapting, is making the laws, but actually doesn't have the reaction or the power to make that change. And corporate sector would be probably the one that is more suitable to push this transformation or this economic transformation through. Because, of course, it has a lot of influence on society. It has a very direct impact on economy. It holds the most talented people within their structures. They have a large capacity, a larger perspective, and of course, a larger capacity for innovate. And this actually affects three dimensions. And as I said earlier, welfare is affecting three dimensions: the ecosystemic services, the economic, and of course the social, which would be the welfare that we receive. From there, we will see that specific metrics affecting all of this corporate side in these three dimensions. So I'm affecting the economic part. We will see sales, gross profit, gross margin, capex, opex, EBITDA. So all these metrics will probably, the list will go on and on and on about economic metrics that affect or that are relevant for the private sector. On the social part, we of course have work-life balance indicators, human rights incidents, workforce rotation. So have specific indicators that will tell us how private sector is performing, and that will take us to understand if we're doing well or we're not doing well. And of course, in environment, we'll have CO2 emissions, energy, waste land use, waste generation, land use, of course, resource inflows and outflows, that if we're going to create a circular models, are going to be very relevant. And actually tell us that if we are kind of the leading stakeholder, the corporate side is the leading stakeholder to just promote this and affect all these matters. But actually, let's say how corporations are built or where we come from. So the change is not easy. We come from a long history of specific turning points that make corporations be like we are. We have Limited Liability Act that actually allowed us to create our companies with a limited responsibility of what we did. Of course, we have a early prioritization of stockholder profits that actually companies are not, well, the judge said on that case that companies were not made for stakeholder profit, but for shareholder profit, and for the interest of a specific shareholders, which actually was the famous Forbes Dodge trial. We came from Great Depression, Second World War. We actually help companies or some companies to shape themselves, to understand how time was affecting them and how market runs made companies higher, bigger and stronger. Of course, we have some globalization that actually affected the way we regulated companies and the impact that we had, the countries had on specific company performance. And of course, we turned down to a specific set of dates that actually become relevant. For example, I think that the first one is the most relevant, is the publication of the Limits to Growth in 1972. That was the first time someone said, guys, we're growing too much and we're not going to be able to hold this growth. Of course, this publication in that time was made with one of the first computers, and they didn't thought about innovation. So they thought that probably now or next year it will be all saturated or not being able to generate wealth or generate welfare. Of course, that now becomes relevant again because they missed out innovation, but of course they didn't miss out the challenge that we are having ahead. And of course, the different specific corporate sustainability models or strategies that actually put ESG or non-financial metrics on top and allow us to understand corporate impacts within all three perspectives, from a social part, from an economic part, and from an environmental part. So actually, what do we need, or what were we asking for each company? We're asking for change operating principles from a very unconscious to a positive impact company. So earlier we had, I built my own corporation, I'm making money, I'm generating employment. Of course, I don't have negative impact. Now we have to understand that we do, and some activities have good impact, some activities have bad impact, and some activities impact us financially, and some activities impact the world in terms of social, environmental, and aspects. Another change is going to be systemic values. We worked on a company that I built my company, I built my values. Everyone will have to work on the idea of what I've defined, because we're going forward with this very strong strategy. Our strategies are going to change. It's not going to be what your CEO is thinking, or is how your CEO is reflecting himself to the system, and how your strategy department is understanding the system. So it's not going to be that them as a innovator department that can think about everything without thinking about how the rest of the system is moving. So we have to embrace a lot of systemic values, and if you see, that's one of the push of the United Nations with the SDGs, and now everyone's embracing the SDGs, because we need actually systemic values just to make the change. We're going to have to change capital management. Of course, this slide is a bit tricky, but if you understand sustainable investing, we are moving from a traditional investing perspective towards an impact investing perspective. And actually, an impact investing perspective that doubles up into different levels. The one that is under market profitability, and of course, the one is within market profitability. Of course, it's not venture philanthropy because we're doing business and we're not there. We, of course, have to generate economic wealth and we have to generate economic services. But you have to see that our models, or how accountants will go, is that we'll probably have exclusive criteria that was a more responsible investment. We're going to have ESG, of course, that is driven by specific ESG metrics, but actually refer to ourselves and refer to our company and refer what's the metrics of the company. And then we'll jump, at some point, we're going to jump to impact investing. It's not going to be only metrics from the inside, it's going to be metrics, so how do I affect the rest? We have to change culture. So we were working on let's say, inertia and in compliant cultures. We have to be competitive. We're going to move, we're going to compete. So regulation and the system is making us to compete against others in terms of ESG performance. Of course, we are competing already in many other aspects. But in ESG and non-financial reporting, we were not competing. We were actually delivering ourselves our own culture in terms of non-financial data. But the next level is to compete and to put one against each other in order to see who is doing better. We're going to change time perspective from a wider and a longer perspective. You're going to see that, yeah, we are looking at our companies in a very wide, let's say, in a very wide perspective, because CEOs think that maybe some specific action might affect the stock market and, of course, bring down the company. And that's happening, of course, happens. But our strategic perspective cannot be focused on that, because that monitoring does not allow us to understand impact and to understand how relevant our long-term values or long-term activities are going to have an impact later on the system. And of course, we're going to change from linear to circular models that actually, as I said, help us to redefine and reuse and recycle some of the activities and some of the products that we generate. Very, very quick, I'm going to explain how purpose is going to be defined within companies. And of course, maybe you all know this term. The term of double materiality is actually which are the material topics that are relevant for a company. We are going to have these two spheres with actually the financial materialities, which is actually how it's affecting my company in terms of finance, and the economic, environmental, and impact and social impact materiality. That's how my activities or specific activities, actions in the company have an impact outside. So it's not going to be the same to consume water in Cape Town that if you do it in the Atlas or in the Alps, or in northern Italy where I met Luigi. So of course there we're going to have to understand what's the impact of the things that we're doing. There is two things that I want to make sure that when we report double materiality, of course, we work on the whole, both circles of the not on the intersection of it. Actually, we have to report everything. But when we talk about where we want to be, what impact do we want to have, we probably have to work on the intersection, because we would like to have, of course, financial impact, but of course, measuring all materiality aspects that affect the rest of the system. Here you can see two examples. Of course, I'm not going to run all through them, but of course, you're going to have that for different sector companies, specific emissions or specific indicators do not have the same relevance, because actually there's not the same activities, so they won't have the same impact. So for example, water management, which actually might be a priority on the textile, maybe on the oil and gas is not such a relevant thing. So it doesn't mean that the oil and gas doesn't have to take care of water, but actually it has to make it to focus more on health and safety, ethical business, or greenhouse gas emissions. So each company will have to do this exercise, and all sectors will probably be similar to each other. So that's what regulation is intending. It's intending to be able to compare sectors across materiality aspects. Of course, they would differ, and some of the strategies of specific companies might position something a bit higher. But of course, material topics for the activity will always be similar in the same sector. And here I want to stop a second just to make you understand what's coming, or what's the regulations that we are seeing. European taxonomy is a classification of activities across the whole Europe activity. So we're saying that each activity, each code of activity is declared to be analyzed against its sustainability performance. So we're going to have, for example, some, let's say, classified activities within the environmental taxonomy that will say if your activity is sustainable or not, and if it's eligible, is that your activity is already published. If it's alignable, is that you have to match the metrics of that activity to be sustainable. That will come that will come from the environmental side and, of course, the social part. We also have CSRD, which actually is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. It's how we're going to report. Everyone's going to report the same metrics. It doesn't matter if they are material or not. So you actually can report this metric is not material for my business, but you still have to report it. That reporting is going to be in the same units. So no different units. No, I build my rotation levels from another type of calculation, or I build my CO2 emissions taking out scope 3 or whatever. So it's going to be the same criteria. Reporting is going to be audited. So actually, I would be able to see both companies and know that the information is audited. And actually, it has to be digitally readable. So a machine can read it. So it's not that I print a PDF and then publish my accounts, and no one's gonna go to the authority and look into my accounts and to my non-financial data. That's gonna be published, and it's gonna be run by a machine. So comparison is gonna be very easy. So actually, the ESG regulation is taken to that middle point that is not really clear, I think, but that middle point that is competition. So it's gonna take us, of course, we have to comply, and comply is not gonna be that hard, because comply is reporting. We'll have to comply. But the rest is performance. The rest is how do I perform on that metric? And how do I position myself on that corner to compete for clients, to compete for financing, to compete for specific LP's investment? Or how do I beat the market in my metrics? So the regulation is not going to ask you emit less than 1,000 tons a year, but they're going to ask you publish them. And it's going to go to your competitor and say, publish them as well. And I'm going to see. And then the market is going to put you on the stage. And of course, CSDD is how we due diligence all this information, all these processes that we implement within the company. Later on, I'll show you what kind of reporting and what kind of metrics that we have to report in CSRD. Now, I think that, I'm running out of time. So I think we're gonna jump to the workshop and the exercise. I built some dashboards for 3 different companies, and I'm gonna ask you to, you all have a specific paper sheet or cardboard in your table that it refers to the company that you've been assigned. You could be assigned to a real estate, fashion, or energy company. And I'm actually setting out some departments. And I want you to, in groups, of course, the workshop is going to start, think about which metrics you think are going to be relevant for the strategy of the company in the next years. Metrics that could come from kilogram the kilograms that you're buying or you're purchasing, or maybe it could be the rotation levels of your company, or the expenditure of maintenance, for example. Any OPEX, CAPEX, of course, all the financial metrics that are relevant, but any kind of metric, and of course the units, you see that there's 2 columns. That's one for the metric and one for the units. So how do you express that metric in units? And how that be relevant for your department for each one of the companies. So you have state, that of course, real estate, that of course it could be, imagine an international company with 10 assets all across the world, doing office rental and residential rental. So they get probably the metrics of use of the company, of the landlord, of the users, and of course they'll have specific cost effective of energy, or they have a lot of metrics in the company. Same as fashion. There's a bit more departments in fashion because we are breaking this out across the life cycle assessment of the companies, and later in energy. So I think the workshop is going to start. I'll leave you here. Of course, you'll have the whole team helping you in case you have any doubts. We'll go around the tables. But the idea is just select 6 metrics, indicators, or data points from each department which could be critical for the future strategy of the company. And how that's going to be, later on you will have the opportunity to discuss and say, why do you choose that metric and why do you think that metric could be relevant for the future of the company in order to generate this change that we were proposing. So thank you very much, and hope you enjoy the workshop. Later on I'll come back and show you some of the results. So thank you very much.
Does anybody want to start in terms of want to speak for your table, just in terms of some of the measurements that you've put together for your organization, the hypothetical organization, whether you're representing the real estate firm, fashion retail company, or an energy company?
You have a blog?
Does anyone want to start? Anyone feeling brave to start at their table? If no one wants, that's okay. Also, we can just go right straight to the next part of the session with Pablo. Oh, perfect. Excellent.
Do we
have a winner.
to plug?
Do you want to speak?
Is it possible?
Excellent. Awesome. What's your name?
My name is France.
France.
I'm from Bullfrog.
Excellent. From Bullfrog. Thank you.
Yeah, so, well, thank you. We got lots of help at the front end, so I thought maybe we should go forward. So our business was a real estate business, and we kind of started with maintenance because we thought maintenance was a huge part of, we assumed that our buildings were existing. And so we saw, first of all, there's like a health and safety metric in terms of number of incidents or accidents that happen on our property. As well as things like air quality, whether it's microbial contamination or dust or particulates. We also talked about waste management, so types of waste and kilos of tonnage of waste coming out of our buildings. We talked about repairs, how those were managed, a number of repairs per year, and the materials used for that. Incoming material, tonnage of material entering the building, because we thought, obviously, we also talked about, circularity later on, so obviously whatever comes in has to come out in some way. Then we talked about energy efficiency, because we're, from a maintenance perspective, we're providing energy to the building in an ongoing way. And then the actual energy consumption, which is a really big piece of it. We got into a little bit of strategy. We talked about how we would like to make our building, the configurability of our building, net zero, stakeholder engagement, and investment in new technology to make our building better. We also tied that into having a continuous improvement team that would continually monitor our metrics and make them better. So we have a lot more, but I'll hand it over to another team.
Thank you, France. Thank you. Does anyone want to go also next? Anyone in the fashion retail side of the categories that had out their tables for fashion retail, or anyone else that feels comfortable? Do you want to go? Excellent. What's your name? Christine.
So I'm not. There are some standard things that we have in there, like for production purchase from our suppliers, the amount of water used in their factories, the amount of toxic chemicals released, and also measuring how many percentage of our supply chain are fair trade certified, or also the number of due diligence that we've conducted throughout our supply chain. But I would also like to, because we came up with some interesting thoughts throughout the process when we were thinking about the metrics. For example, we thought of a recovery and maintenance program. Basically, from a strategy level, the company have to decide the balance between durability and also the recyclability of clothes. So if you think about different type of clothes, maybe the jackets, the down will be the ones that can be maintained and saved through maintenance programs, whereas some of the T-shirts that are torn more easily, where we will be focusing more on recyclability. And the recovery and maintenance program also have a community element in it, where we can have local spots where we could employ local women or local community to help us work on the maintenance, like stitching up clothes, and that will also have a social element of engaging the community and let them to profit throughout that process. And another interesting thing that I think is like AI-enabled fitting, so we could reduce the number of brick and mortar stores and save the energy used from that. So just sharing a few, I think it's pretty interesting thoughts that we've came up throughout the process. Thank you all.
Thank you, Christine. That's great. Anybody else that wants to speak, maybe from the energy side? Any other tables that had energy that want to speak for their table? or even from the fashion retail that also had fashion retail, but maybe from some other angles or a few other items that weren't mentioned by Christine and from her table? Anyone else? No? If we're good, if we're fine, then we can just get going with Pablo's next part of it if everyone's happy. Excellent. Okay, great. So Pablo, we'll pass it back to you and to continue with your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thank you. Of course, later, I'm sorry if the presentation was too much information for the session. And of course, I always tell Luigi that we should do a very a long course for this. But I'm now going to show you a few dashboards so I can connect the computer. Well, first of all, this is an example of reporting what we have to report, what we will be asked to report. So here you have some metrics, and you'll have these ones are all environmental. You see, and I'll go down, scroll down, and you see some others. But greenhouse gas intensity per net turn of income, carbon credits, greenhouse gas removal projects that we are investing on. We have energy consumption, but the whole mix. So you have to go to your bill and look about the mix that you are using. Of course, scope 1, 2, 3, that's clear. Material climate-related impacts. Are you having a specific impacts on climate? So that's published already regulation. So in Europe, and you will see that some of these metrics will come out still gonna have to be ratified by the authorizations, but that's how it's going to look like from next year. Of course, you have affecting climate change, but you have affecting pollution, affecting water and marine resources, affecting biodiversity, so response metrics for the biodiversity, friendly consumption. And we can go to the social, for example. Policies, there's a lot of governance in the social part. So policies, working hours, fair remuneration, how much do you pay in each one of the locations? Employment of persons with disabilities, how many disabled people are working on your company? Social dialogues, privacy at work. So a lot of metrics with actually a number that they're gonna ask you to fulfill or to declare on. Beyond that, of course, we have governance later on, anti-corruption, bribery cases, diversity policies, nomination process, how you nominate people in charge. So our companies are going to be very audited. So it will be a lot of information out there. And that's going to be public, and that's going to be readable. So you probably can build a machine to compare companies, and that's going to be a very useful one to understand which one's doing better. That's what's the part of regulation taking you to compete. So once they ask you for all these, you only have your only chance is to get there out there and improve those metrics. I'm going to show another. I think we're going to start here. And here, for example, I started with the fashion. I started with the fashion sector. I think I'm going to have time to do the fashion and the real estate one. But here, for example, you have a sales of 5 products. You say BP, that could be a backpack, a jacket, some shoes, trousers, and T-shirt. So that'd be 5 products going around the world, selling in different countries, and of course in different ways. But of course we can go for a specific product in United States. So our backpack is sold in United States, mostly online. But of course we have a specific sales in Miami, New York, San Francisco, and these are the metrics. I'm selling 36,000 units of backpacks across the world, across this country. And of course we should be able to trace that in other countries. So if I press not only US, but I press all the backpacks, so I'll have all the backpacks and where they sold and in which amount for all that. So these kind of metrics of sales, we already used to them. And we've probably, well, most of it, not everyone, but advanced companies could have these for sales. And it's very intuitive. And of course, you can know what you're selling. But maybe we can have that for the OpEx. Maybe think about having the same exercise for sales than we have for the OpEx. Where am I investing in? Where am I wasting? Where is my money going? And of course, we still are working with only economic figures. But if I do an LCA of my whole fashion product, my fashion starts on a creation process. It was probably mostly concentrated in a specific location because it's where I create, so it's where I work. And probably would be here in Toronto. That'd be nice. So I'm building a BSI conscious clothing here in Toronto, and that's my design. And that's the expenditure I'm having here. But maybe that clothes, of course, that will go for products, but maybe the developments are also road. The planning, the product development, and the purchase that I'm doing is all across the world. So maybe I'd be spending a specific money in Taiwan, in Kuala Lumpur, whatever. From here, you can take that, of course, your impact, and you see the bubbles are the same size, because I don't want to, they should probably change about the amount of money or the amount of CO2 that you're spending in a specific, or emitting in a specific, so the volume that you're having in each location is going to vary across the different metrics that you're asking for, or that we were asked for. So of course, CO2 is going to have, for example, probably the production side is going to have more CO2, and probably the distribution, if I might work on electric, is not going to have that much impact. So we can have that for all our products, and maybe, I don't know, the end of life, some of you probably chose collection. Do I collect my products? Does this match actually the sales? I'm collecting the products, maybe the ratios, the collection ratios are not the same. So maybe I'm selling, but I'm collecting only, I don't know, half of it. Or maybe Europe is recycling less than what we're doing here in Canada, and our collection ratio here is amazing. So probably my spending on recycle, reuse is going to be different. If I recycle, reuse in Vancouver, it's going to be very readable because I have a very big infrastructure doing recycle, and the society is bringing me the clothes back. Or I've made up a great network of recycling, but maybe in Valencia or Lisbon, it's not working because I have some products, for example, the backpack, which is very difficult to recycle, which actually the backpack can only be recycled in Lisbon. There I want you to understand that each product is going to behave differently. So it's not the same if I have a can of Coke here than in UK, and it's probably that can is the same product, but it's not in a can, it's actually in a plastic bottle. It's not going to behave here as it's going to behave in UK. Probably in UK, they will ban plastic imports for 2025. So I won't be able to import any plastic to the country. So that's an ESG measure, because they cannot hold the amount of plastic they are recovering in the waste management centers. So they cannot hold it, so they ban imports. So of course, my product in plastic bottle in UK is going to drop down dramatically. So how do I plan my sales? How do I plan my product evolution in the UK differently than the one I'm planning here? Because there won't be a ban here. So there you will see that different ESG topics affect directly the performance. I'm going to shift to the product. Okay, we chose the backpack. What data do we have on the backpack? Do we have the materials? Actually, yes. We've got brown leather, GG, Super canvas, whatever. We have nylon. We have other gold effects that we put there. Has silk, the zipper, of course, that's metal. Are we going to understand the impact of that? Of course, there's no problem if we're doing one, but if we're selling 36,000 in the US, it's very relevant the amount of leather that I'm using, because I'll need cows for that. I probably need to understand how many cows do I kill a year or change the skin in order to do my backpacks. So here you'll have their kilograms is going to be a good metric. Meter square is going to be an amazing metric. And here you have the emission factors that we earlier mentioned on the chat. And of course, it's all about representatives. It's how representative is the metric that I'm using of my, of course, emission factors are public in some countries, and some industries do promote their emission factors and share it with the market. Some don't. I don't know the emission factors of a yogurt, but probably Danone or Nestle will probably tell me, and they probably have that metric. So I will have to ask them to retrieve that information, and that will come from the reporting that I told you, that I showed. So we'll understand how much CO2 comes out of a single yogurt. So if my company consumes 800 yogurts, I'll know the CO2 emissions of my activity. So there you have. So the accounting is not simple. For example, you have the process of the company here, I of the production. So here are the crop farming, the ginning, the sewing, the spinning and the weaving, the animal rearing for that materials. Of course, the ones that there are synthetic don't have animal rearing. So probably we'll have to make sure where is the impact. Do I have to use natural? Is organic the best? In marketing-wise, organic is always the best. But actually, those cotton bags that we wear, they're not better than the plastic ones. It's only a marketing strategy. Or the aluminum bottle that we all carry at the office. Actually, impact of aluminum is much more higher than the one that you use with a paper cup every day. I know there's many paper cups, but if we do a recycling process for paper, it would be more easy than recycling an aluminum bottle with a plastic tap on it. So when you are counting those impacts and you're not making decisions on marketing, you'll really be able to say, okay, I take the bottle or I take the paper cup. So that's the future of where we're going to be. So at the moment, the sustainability manager comes to the office and says, we're going to change all the cups, and that's going to be amazing. But then next year, he'll have to come with a metric, say, this has less impact. This financially is working. This actually helps society. And I have metrics for that. So that's the change that you have to expect from non-financial accounting. Processes should be understood like precisely, and of course, on the tiers that we are affecting. If I show the map, you have the assembly, you have the production complements, you have the raw material productions, and different materials come from different places. So here you have the color, so polymaterials come from crop farming, oil extraction. So yeah, nylon comes from oil extraction. That's going to be accounted on my model if I use a lot of nylon. If I use a cow, then I have to go cattle breeding. And if I use a worm, I'll have silkworm farming. So you have to understand where all the materials, this entropy that we are changing, how do we take it from and where do we leave it? So that's why the circularity of the model that you mentioned, it was really relevant. We're going to move also to what might come next. What's the impact? So maybe the impact of a consumer experience in a company is specific, or that's the CO2 of both three products, okay? So you can see, for example, in development, if I press, that's the CO2 emission of the shirt, and I have, for example, the backpack, sorry, and I have all the emissions that I've been doing in each process. So I'll be able to say, if this provider is better than the other one, I'll be able to say, is a planner, if I'm investing a lot of planning, so metrics will be very helpful to compare, let's say, as I was referring before, if the Coke is going to win the bottle or the aluminum can. So there, a lot of models can be made. Of course, CO2, but it can be also waste. CO2 has a price now. You have a voluntary price and regulated price. Each country is going to make their price. With waste, is going to happen the same. So how much the Toronto or Ontario state is able to capture? How much plastic? How much aluminum? How much are they capable to recycle? If you produce more than that, or you exceed that limit, probably they'll charge you for that because they have to do an extra effort for doing that. And different locations will behave differently. So if you have a product that maybe emits a lot of CO2 in a specific country, where here in Canada maybe, because you have a lot of land, a lot of land, and of course it's not so much populated, CO2 prices won't be as high. But if you go back to Manila or India, probably CO2 emissions will be massive. The cost of CO2, so pricing of CO2, so 100 euros a ton of CO2, or it might be 50 here. So you have to understand your financials where you're emitting. So that's why the world or the location of the assets or your providers or your supply chain is very relevant because they will get those costs. And how do you, across your strategy, ask them to transformate and to change? That'll be very relevant. And of course, not everything has the same timing. Maybe it's not today where we can tell the construction side just to change all the trucks for electric. Maybe it doesn't make sense because the electric batteries have, so we have to measure that. So we can tell our boss or our CEO or our CFO, who actually is the one who has to pay the change and has to look for the performance, if that makes sense or not. So if you become ever a CSO or if you become ever a manager of a construction side, or if you become, you'll have these metrics will come every day to your daily life, things that you would never thought. And that might happen on the other sector as well. So let me see if I can change here. So that can happen on a real estate case. Of course, I have a different cycle. My cycle is not the same. I have a production stage, of course. I have a construction. So product stage is where I understand where my products are across the world. And where do I get the iron? Where do I get the aluminum? Where do I get the wood? That's a product stage. They are defining the products. There's a construction stage. What do I do with the products? How do I assemble? What's the cost of assembly? What's the expenditure? And of course, emissions or indicators that come out of the construction. We got the use. You shouldn't forget about the use. In clothing, there's a lot of impact in use. In real estate, there's much more impact on use because it's longer time of use. And we have the end of life. And of course, recycling and disposal of some of the materials that we're not able anymore to use. And then you see the metrics here on the right. We have euro. We have meter cubic, which is actually volume. We have kilogram. We have kilojoule, which actually is going to be energy-wise that we understand our building. But then actually the return only comes in euro meter squared. So you're selling only areas, but you're building volumes. So you have to make sure that you understand that when you do your accounting, and that you know that you work on volumes, and your impact is on volumes, but actually your sales are on meter squared. So that's gonna be relevant how you structure. Of course, you need analysis, you need data, and of course a platform in order to understand how to showcase. Here at the bottom, I point out some of the database that you will need to create this process. Of course, product, of course, purchase, processes, suppliers, process impact, material impact, waste disposal impact, and equipment impact. So these metrics seem to be impossible to catch out and impossible to be able to handle or be able to find. But actually, they're not so difficult. So for example, this is the schedule of values of a building. That's a structure. I've got material database. What do I buy? I got the plumbing circuit for the refrigerant of the whole building. I've got the paint. I've got the flooring or the flooring of the piece of flooring. So I'm saying the meter squared of flooring that I'm buying to a provider. So I have all those are materials. Do I have the equipment database? There'll be the fire alarm or the specific refrigerators equipment. And then I have the process. How much a specific man or individual takes to install that equipment, takes to paint the whole wall. So I have liters of paint, and then I have someone that is taking his time just to put that liters of paint into the wall. So that's going to be actually defining my asset. It's going to be defined how much did it cost, how much did it work, what's the impact, what's the social impact because more time painting more time painting probably is more accident rate. It's highly likely that if you have a building for 10 years in construction, your accident rate is going to grow. And you have much more social impacts that, of course, if you are efficient and you have a good supplier and efficient building. On the other side, we need the impacts. So we need timber products. We need to understand how, we need to understand how a specific manufacturer hardware, how many meters squared, what's the energy, what's the greenhouse gas emissions that each one material impact has. So if I'm using thousands of iron or aluminum in my structure, I need to know the impact of that. So we have to go back to the other slide and then to look for aluminum extraction impact metrics for emission values. And if we go, of course, disposal. What's the impact that we're having here on disposal? We'll have disposal on construction, concrete, for disposal in an open loop, disposing concrete tons. It might take us 0.98 kilograms of CO2. Maybe throwing it on the landfill instead of 0.9 is 1.2. So it's different metrics for if you do the process well or if you do the process in the wrong way. So we'll have improvement. That's performance. That's only a metric, but it's actually performance of your company. It's actually value. So people that think sustainability doesn't pay itself, it does pay. It's actually CO2 is price of CO2 emissions in that place. And that's going to be landfill versus open loop, more or less. So you have to understand. And not always is going to be the dark side, the one that pays less or that pays more. So you have to make the balance. And there are opportunities. There's trillions of billions and billions of dollars in these type of opportunities in your business. So that's why everyone's selling that. Of course, no one's yet started accounting, but of course there's the opportunity. And actually regulation is going to take you there. There's open databases for emission factors. And maybe it doesn't see, but carbon dioxide for lime products, and then you have the CO2, where the metric comes from, and of course the number. How many? And this can have for different products. Maybe aluminum production, of course, the IPCC, which is the authorization that tells how much impact does that production has. And then we have the metric, kilograms per the unit of aluminum consumption. We also have the products. I said that you need the products, you need to know the assets, you know what you buy. Siemens tells you what you buy. You're buying, and you have it here. You buy in steel, zinc, and zinc coated. And actually you have the grams there. Actually the weight, is it by chance that they're telling you that? No. They actually have to report which materials they're using and into which level. So they're giving you the grams of plastic that they have on the product. And you could do that for all. Of course, it's amazing work, and you have to do accounting, and that's the structure that companies will have to have. And actually, it's telling you. And if you see this before, there's a sign there: no disposal. So recycling cost on your hand. You bought it. You have that recycling cost. You are sponsoring that recycling cost. If that label is different, and that's disposal, it's probably your cost is going to be less. And of course, your accounting will probably perform better. Here is different database, of course, production. That needs a bit of work. Of course, consumption. You have all the bills. Every time we have more metrics on the bills. Why? Because they are asked, the companies are forced to tell me those metrics. I need specific, the energy distribution, energy mix that I'm using. So my tenants will have to tell me what they're wasting, who do they contract with. So that's my impact. We have to decide if the impact goes to the tenants, how do I build the impact to each tenant, or do I actually assume the whole impact of my production on my use? So of course models actually tend to divert. So you might have a production stage which does not give you revenue. It gives you not so much cost, a lot of CO2 emissions, energy consumption, of course, are high. So you have to understand your asset as when you invest in it, in of course production sites, and when you dispose the asset. So maybe it could be relevant only to invest in this area. And maybe this gap here is not worth it for your investment. Maybe your company doesn't have to do the whole cycle for that asset, because that asset is not readable enough at that point because it has a lot of impacts that will affect your metrics. And then with this process, we will take non-ESG performance assets out of the market. Those assets will not be on the market anymore, or your activity is not going to be aligned, or it's not going to be eligible for the market. So lenders and investors won't go to your activity if you're not performing in a specific way. So that will have both sectors, your products and of course your building. Yeah, I think I'm running out of time already. So I just gave you an example. I also like very much the top graph is supplier performance studies, is how do you assess performance of your suppliers. So people think that purchase policies of green purchase policies are not relevant, but actually are going to be the most powerful tool that you'll have in a company in order to clean your accounting. So if your suppliers add 0, then you'll be able to reach a better performance. If they don't add 0, if they add you cost and if they add you impact, then it's going to be much more difficult to press or to understand. So the key is also in supply. And sorry, last number, sorry. For this building, there was a 400K valuation on CO2 emissions only. So we took the materials, we assessed the energy that they consume, we assessed the kilograms that we use, and we got 400,000 euros that you have to be expected to be built if you're paying for the CO2s. So that changes completely the numbers of a specific building. Sorry, I leave it there. I know I'm late. Thank you very much. And hopefully you understood this as a way to think corporations in a different level, and how your company, even if it's a venture capital or like a small company or a startup, or even it's a massive, if you're building new models, how you have to predict or understand future, because your company is going to depend, or the survival of that company is going to depend on that, for sure. So thank you very much, and thank you for hosting me.
Well, I think you'll all agree that those last 10 minutes were like a revelation in themselves, and looking at how you're going to be managing data, managing information as you plan projects, and how companies are going to be required to report on this as they move forward to compete in a global economy. So it's daunting, but I think Pablo, thank you for helping us sort through it and understand the work ahead for us. From the BSI perspective, I hope you've enjoyed this series and that it's been valuable to you. We are going to be doing more projects like this, more work like this, working with your own companies to develop solutions and implement them, and organizing design charrettes that can help put you on the track to organizing your own company's approach to this kind of work. In the next few days, you're going to receive your certificate of completion for participating in the series. And I want to thank you for being so participatory and engaged in the whole process. I'd like to hand it over now to Daniel Rufo from Toronto Board of Trade for him to wrap up and end the whole series. Thank you.
Yeah, hello everyone. Daniel Rufo here, Director of Partnerships at the Board of Trade. I just want to thank Luigi and his team and Pablo today for an excellent day, and hope you all enjoyed it. Just as we wrap up, we at the board, we recognize the importance of our business community adopting ESG strategies, and alongside our partners and all of you, we're extremely proud to accelerate successful ESG outcomes in our region. And finding ways to unite cross-functional teams to face sustainability challenges and to generate solutions that can drive real impact are crucial to our success here in the Toronto region. We hope you walk away from today's final session feeling inspired to be implementing ESG frameworks within your organizations and be ESG champions as well. So keep an eye out, as Luigi mentioned, in the coming days for an email from us where you'll receive your certificate of completion, along with the digital copies of all the presentations these last 3 weeks. We also have a few other important events coming up during the month of June. Starting on Tuesday, June 13th, we'll be hosting a Future of Manufacturing Symposium aimed at exploring the game-changing opportunities to elevate our region's global competitiveness. The following day, on June 14th, is a marquee event, our annual lunch, where we are hosting a collection of businesses and industries to really focus on the state of our city and how leaders see Toronto accelerating its growth, maximizing its business competitiveness, and demonstrating its global impact. And also, if you're looking to sip, mingle, and network, we're going to be hosting a summer cocktail event on June 21st out on our patio here, so we hope to see you all there as well. And if you're interested in buying tickets to any of these events, make sure to visit bot.com to learn more. And finally, thank you again to our partners and facilitators, George Brown College and the Brookfield Sustainability Institute, our series partners, CBRE, RBC, and Enbridge, and our networking partner, WSP, as well as the board's principal sponsors, Scotiabank, Globe and Mail, U of T, and SNC-Lavalin. Thank you all for joining us, and feel free to enjoy a little bit of coffee and mingling before we wrap up. Take care.